I just want to first thank everyone for coming out today. I know it's a pretty busy week with homecoming and everything, and we just really appreciate your presence here. And for those of you who are new to our Politics in a Pint conversation series, it's put on by the McCarthy Center, and the McCarthy Center is a center on campus here who fosters dialogue in the community by promoting public policy and civic engagement on campus. And one program that we have through the McCarthy Center that we would like all of you to apply, it's open to all majors and ages, is the Mentor Program. And through the Mentor Program, we have recent alums in the public service field in all areas, and we pair you with a mentor in your interest area, and it's a really good networking opportunity. And then also we do many speakers and events on campus like Politics in a Pint. And actually, to put in a little plug for next Thursday at 5 o'clock, we are bringing another alum to campus. Her name is Jonna Van Doon, and we're going to be talking about the GOP and conservatism. And it's going to be a very, very awesome event, so hopefully you can make it. And tonight we welcome another alum to campus. We welcome Emile Nakhleh, who graduated in 1963, and he majored in political science here at St. John's. And while at St. John's, he was the president of the Cosmopolitan Club, which is a club on campus that helped foreign students adapt to American society. And in his free time on Friday nights, I found this in the record here, Emile and his freshman buddies spent lots of time in their dorm rooms discussing everything from Israeli schools to American girls. And also on campus here, Emile wrote many opinion pieces, and this one is titled Them Foreign Students. And his life at St. John's prepared him really well for the world. Emile became an expert in Middle Eastern politics while pursuing a master's degree at Georgetown University and his doctorate at the American University. And then also, he was awarded a Fulbright Research Fellowship in 1972. And by this picture, which is in the St. John's Alum magazine, I don't know how you could not award that award with those sideburns. And throughout his career, he's spoken at many colleges and on many campuses. But in 1993, he began his career in the CIA as first a scholar in residence and chief of the Regional Analyst Unit in the Office of Near Eastern and South Asian Analysis, and then as the director of the Political Islam Strategic Analysis Program, which is an incredible accomplishment. And here, this picture you can see is of Emile on C-SPAN. So, and in addition to his career, he's also written many publications and many scholarly articles, which I would definitely recommend you check out on the internet because they're fascinating. And currently, he's a consultant at the University of New Mexico for Political Islam, Middle East, and Intelligence. And I would just like to say that we're really proud of Emile and his accomplishments, and we welcome you back to campus. And just kind of a side note here, feel free to grab pizza and drinks. This is going to be an informal discussion here. Feel free to get up whenever you need. And just a little bit on the structure of the event tonight, we're going to have a couple students who are in a Middle Eastern policy class taught by Professor Gary Prevost, who are going to ask about 10 minutes of questions to begin with, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. And so feel free to ask Emile any question you want on the Middle East and more. And to start off, I'll turn it over to Justin.
I'm going to start off with the first question, and I guess I'm going to bring you back to your early life and just kind of ask you what it was like to grow up as a Catholic Arab in Israel. And if you could just tell us any bit about that, that'd be wonderful.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming. I just want to correct the record just to add a bit of a spice to it, lest you think I'm getting old. When I graduated in 1963, I was 5 years old. So I just want to kind of put it in perspective, you see. And just a serious note, and then I'll go to other comments. I just want to tell you that the education I received at St. John's, liberal arts education, actually put me where I am today. It was one of the best forms of education any student can get anywhere. Over the years, I have hired a lot of people, both in academia and in government, as professors and as intelligence analysts. And you know what? I only would need to spend half an hour with a new hire to know whether that person went to a liberal arts college or not. And liberal arts graduates, if they are good students, and as I am sure most of you here are, can do well because they are taught how to think clearly, how to ask questions, and how to seek solutions after they are able to define the problem. This is really the essence of liberal arts education. And underlying all of that is a value system that you can carry with you throughout your life. So this is just a plug I want to put in for not just St. John's, but for liberal arts education. I am so happy to see Father Don here, and from my years back in. But when I got on the bus from Minneapolis coming to St. John's, my first trip to the United States and to St. John's, I knew nobody, and there was Father Godfrey Diekman waiting for me at the bus stop. He was, of course, many of you do not know him. He was a famous theologian with a worldwide reputation. And this was the type of education I got at and received at St. John's. Now, when I came from Galilee, you know, my first article was in a magazine, Catholic magazine, called From Galilee to St. John's. My first experience here was that first winter, and I literally froze my ass off. Excuse me, I meant my head off. And it was an incredible experience. And the first Friday, I was standing in line in the cafeteria to eat, and here this kind of poor Catholic boy from Galilee standing in line. And so I asked a fellow student, I said, what are they serving here today? Well, he said, of course, it's fish, it's Friday. I mean, I said, no meat today? He says, no. I said, where do you come from? Do you eat meat on Friday? I said, we don't eat meat Monday. We don't eat meat Tuesday. We don't eat meat Wednesday. We don't eat meat Thursday. We don't eat meat Friday. And he said, my, you must be very religious. I said, no, we are poor like hell. And but growing up I went to high school in Nazareth, Terrasanta High School. It's a Catholic high school in which English was the language of instruction. We could not afford the 4 years, so I studied the first year of high school at home. I got the textbooks, and then I studied them at home. So I spent 3 years in high school. And when I came to college, I spent 3 years in college. So I kind of saved 2 years, you see. And when I went to high school, my dad took me to high school, and the registrar, who was an American, the president was an Irish priest, and the others were English. I've never heard an American speak before. So this Brother Robert, he said something which I did not understand at all. Basically, to go to the registrar, get your books, and go to classes. I did not understand a word. And then I turned to my father. I said, "What the hell I'm doing here?" He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I did not understand a word of what he was saying." And he had a translator who interpreted to me what he was saying. And my dad said, "You learn." And he left me there and went. And the third year, I became the school interpreter to families who bring their kids to school to start their education. So I had a great education. Growing up in Nazareth and in the environment was a minority situation where Christians were a minority. Today, Christians are even a smaller minority in the Middle East. Not just in Israel, but in every Middle Eastern country. Most Christians and most Catholics certainly are either in the States or Australia or Canada or Latin America. Most of them have left. One time I was briefing the president and we were talking about Christians, so he said, "What do Christians in the Middle East do?" Well, I said, "Mr. President, they come here and they become experts in Islam." So this is what I have done in this country. So I came from there. I spent few years looking for scholarships to come to this country because we could not certainly afford education. So I got a free ride, full scholarship from St. John's. And that's why I came from Galilee to St. John's in northern Minnesota.
My question kind of went off that, which was kind of how did you get connected to St. John's, if you could elaborate on that a little bit. And then possibly just talk a little bit about what else you did at St. John's besides talk about American women and whatever the other thing in that was that I couldn't remember. But whatever else you did here back in the early 60s.
Well, you know, in my initial contact with St. John's, I grew up in a family where I had a brother who was a priest and a sister who is a nun. The brother with whom my wife, who is sitting in the audience there, worked for 14 years, a Catholic priest in Nazareth, and they both built a center for Catholic families and children to teach them all kinds of professions and jobs and so on, and train them to do all kinds of things to get jobs. And my sister is still, my brother passed away. My sister remains a nun. She is a principal of the best Catholic high school, girls' high school, K through 12, in Jerusalem, and in the West Bank, and in Jordan, and in Israel. Their success rates are phenomenal. Every year, in the senior year, they take a national exam, and that school has always gotten the highest grades in the sciences and the humanities in any high school in the country. And she's been a principal of that high school for 30 years. Very interesting to keep in mind that 93% of her 2,000 young women, K through 12, 93% are Muslim girls. Only 8% are Catholics and other Christians. And she said she is committed to educating these women because no society can be free if half of its population is not educated. That is her mission in life. So my brother, being a priest, the archbishop, our archbishop, had contacts in this country. So he, through some of his contacts with priests in this country, one was in Chicago who was Benedictine, told him about St. John's, and hence my application to St. John's. And then we really, at St. John's, I had a great time. I worked hard. As I said, I took about 21 hours a semester in order to finish in 3 years. I had a dear friend who is still sitting who is in the audience now, Dick Jessen. He was my classmate. He's a retired judge, Minnesota judge. And we basically worked on helping foreign students adjust to living here. And we made sure, for example, that every foreign student at St. John's was invited to a family in this area on holidays, so that no foreign student would stay alone in the college, either Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter. So that was one thing. The second thing was to help foreign students learn English and adjust to life here. We passed a law that any two foreign students from the same country who are caught in the cafeteria speaking in their own native language to each other would be fined a quarter. In other words, we wanted them to speak English so that they will pick up English, and so we kind of helped that. So we established clubs for foreign students. And then I had a part-time job, because even though I had a scholarship, I went to the registrar. I think his name was, the bursar was Father Gordon at the time. I said, Father Gordon, I need a job, a part-time job. He said, what do you need a job for? You have a full scholarship. Well, I need some money, I said, to go to the movies or to go to the bar on Sunday and drink some 3-2 beer on Sundays. And he says, okay. So he called Mr. O'Dwyer, who was the head of the liturgical press. I said, okay. I went down there. Mr. O'Dwyer, this big, bless his heart and his soul, big Irish man, he says, oh, you want a job? I said, yep. He said, I have an opening. I said, what is it? He said, janitor. I said, I take it. I had no idea what janitor meant. I went up to my room and opened it up in the dictionary. It took me 3 weeks, more than 3 weeks, to dare to write my mother in Israel to tell her that I was a janitor. She would have said, why would you go 7,000 miles to be a janitor? So I told her, I said, another kid and I, we take all this paper and boxes, and we pile them up and take them down to the lake and burn them every Friday. And she said, and you get paid for that? I said, yep. So I did not tell her I was a janitor. and then by the third year, I began to apply to graduate school. So I was fortunate to go to Georgetown for the master's, and then American in Washington for the PhD.
All right, well, my next question kind of shifts towards the Middle East and your studies or your expertise there. And I guess I'm wondering, from your opinion, where can the U.S. most improve in its relations with the Middle East?
Well, this is the $64,000 question, isn't it? I think the biggest challenge facing it's not recent, but this challenge has become much more apparent and much more crystallized in the last 2.5 years since the so-called Arab Spring and Arab Revolution started. And this challenge is how to balance our national interest with our values. I mean, this is basically the challenge. We are a major power. We are a superpower. We have interest in that entire region regardless of what regime is in power. If you keep the Middle East map in mind, you will find that we have military presence. Just on the military presence alone, we have military presence either in every country or next to every country in the region, either in the country itself or what we call over the horizon. So militarily, we are in every country in the region. Second, we are commercially connected with every country in the region. Not just oil with the Gulf countries, but we are connected commercially with every country in the region. Third, we are educationally connected with most countries in the region. One of the most prominent programs, educational programs that this country has invented really, since 48 is the Fulbright program. The Fulbright program is exchange of professors, academics, students at different levels. In fact, I started my research and my expertise as a senior Fulbright scholar in Bahrain, where I spent a year. And I understand you are interested in going as a Fulbright to Turkey next year. The Fulbright program has involved the exchange of thousands of students, Americans into those countries, and academics from those countries into the United States. Today, there are American schools, either satellite campuses or freestanding universities, American, in almost every country in that region. From Turkey to Lebanon, to Iraq, to Jordan, to Egypt, to Kuwait, to Bahrain, to Abu Dhabi, to Oman, to Dubai, and then North Africa. Almost every country in the region, we have American institutions. Then finally, as a superpower, the United States is charged with what we call the safety and security of the commons. That's capital C. The commons are public maritime passages. For instance, the Suez Canal, Bab el-Mandab, the Strait of Hormuz, these are three strategic waterways. We are in charge, really, of the safety of these places. And so the United States, militarily and strategically, is involved in the region. And finally, and I guess the last point was the final point, this is finally plus, is the question of terrorism. I mean, the question of terrorism, I will talk about that later if there are questions about it, but the question of terrorism is a serious, serious question. Even though Al-Qaeda Central has waned, we have seen the rise of franchise terrorist groups across the Middle East, across North Africa, across the Sahel in Africa, and all the way around the region. And that is an important issue that the United States cannot ignore.
I was wondering, we're going to go to a couple of specific countries now. How do you foresee the U.S.-Iranian relationship developing under the new President Rouhani, given what happened over the past couple of days at the UN, as well as his comments about the Holocaust?
Look, as a question of context, Iran is a major power in the Persian Gulf. I mean, we cannot ignore this reality, regardless of the regime. In fact, under the Shah, until 1979, when the Shah was toppled and a new regime came to power, the United States considered Iran as the fulcrum, the center of stability and security in the Persian Gulf. Indeed, we viewed Iran and Saudi Arabia as the two parts of what we call the security belt in the Persian Gulf. If the regime changed in Iran, it did not mean that the value of Iran as a major power is lessened. I mean, I think that's an important point to keep in mind. Iran is a country of about 80 million people. It's the major Shia power in the world. Iran did not have Shia before, but in 1600, the previous Shah of Iran declared Shia as the official religion of that state, and Iran became the major Shia power in the world, and certainly in the Persian Gulf. Our relationship with Iran, of course, soured dramatically with the establishment of the Islamic Republic under the Ayatollahs in 1979. And that happened primarily because of the hostage crisis, when the students invaded the embassy and took our diplomats hostage and it took 444 days before they will let go. That relationship has never really improved since then. Now, there have been areas in which the United States and Iran had cooperated. We cooperated over terrorism in Afghanistan, the early days of Afghanistan. We cooperated during the early days of Iraq, after the toppling of Saddam Hussein. We cooperated on a few other terrorist issues. The worst part of the relationship occurred during the previous president, Ahmadinejad. Ahmadinejad was a hot-headed student who was involved, by the way, in the hostage crisis after the Islamic Republic. And he was a populist president. He was elected by really not urban and urbane and moderate and highly educated folks, Iranians in the cities. He was mostly elected by rural Iran. Very populist, very security-oriented, very chauvinistic, very nationalistic-driven politician. His views of the Holocaust, unfortunately, were not unique. So his statements about the Holocaust and about Israel right away angered most of the Western world. And that relationship worsened. The relationship also became bad during the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s. Not that we liked Saddam Hussein, but 2 years into that war, the United States decided that Iran should not win the war. And we realized if the United States had not supported Saddam Hussein, Iran would win the war. So the United States began to help Iraq with intelligence, with weapons, with planning, with command, with control, with communication, until Iraq ended up not losing the war. And Iran was forced under Ayatollah Khomeini to sign the peace agreement with Iraq. Iran never forgave us for that. Iran still has not forgiven us for helping to topple Mossadegh in 1954. Keep in mind, history in the Middle East is a living thing. It's not like here, where to you all, Vietnam is a distant history that you do not even remember. History in the Middle East, 2,000-year-old history, remains a living entity. So Iran still remembers 1954. Now this president, Hassan Rouhani, was allowed to run, by the way, by the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, who replaced the previous supreme leader, Khomeini. He was allowed to run among the 6 candidates for one reason. You would say, why did they not ban him from running? Because he was moderate by comparison. He is PhD, educated in England, was a negotiator, nuclear negotiator before, very urbane, very sophisticated. So you would say, why did they allow him to run? You know the reason? They allowed him to run because they thought he had no chance on God's earth of winning. And in fact, not one public opinion poll showed him ahead until the last 76 hours. The tide turned in his favor 76 hours before the elections. And he won. Not only he won without a runoff. He did not have to have a runoff like Ahmadinejad before him to win the presidency. So the question is, he came to office. And of course, the intelligence question for intelligence analysts is how long this leeway, what kind of leeway the supreme leader would allow him what kind of freedom, how long is the leash he would give him of action, freedom of action. So far, he has given him a big leeway to develop new policies. And what are these new policies? Basically, wants to bring Iran from isolation, from being a pariah state in the international community, to bring it back into the international community. And this is not just for altruistic reasons. The reason is that sanctions have hurt the Iranian economy very badly. These sanctions that were imposed by the United Nations at the behest of the United States because of Iran's nuclear program. Now, for the record, we do not believe, the United States government does not believe that Iran is pursuing a weaponized program. We do not believe that Iran has made the decision to go nuclear. We do not believe that Iran has made the decision to weaponize its nuclear enrichment program. And so then Rouhani began to issue statements that he would like to end the sanctions, he would like to re-engage with the international community. And that means he would be willing to negotiate over the nuclear program. We don't know how true that is, but he is interested, perhaps, in either reducing the level of enrichment from 20% or be satisfied with Iran becoming a nuclear capable power, but not a nuclear power. This is a national prestige, a national stature that Iran has used its own indigenous brain power to develop a nuclear capability, but not nuclear weapons. He repeated the fatwa, the religious edict that the previous Ayatollahs issued, namely that possessing nuclear weapons from the Islamic Republic's point of view is a sin, that it is illegal against their vision of Islam to establish a nuclear weapon or any weapon of mass destruction. Even though Iran suffered from weapons of mass destruction by Saddam Hussein in the late 80s, especially poison gas. And so we began to see then in that perhaps a possibility that we could work together. Then he gave last week this interview with Ann Curry for NBC. That interview was dissected, every word of it in Washington, not only the translation, but the original language in which he spoke, which was Farsi, every word of what he meant. And then the president began to exchange letters, he and Rouhani. So there is a possibility it would work. At the United Nations, I think the United States offered for the president to meet with him or to shake hands with him, and then Rouhani thought that that was not the right moment. And basically we were rebuffed in that. His statements compared to Ahmadinejad, his statements on the Holocaust compared to Ahmadinejad is light years better. It perhaps did not satisfy elements in Israel, but it was a tremendous progress over what Ahmadinejad said. Yesterday he said the Holocaust did occur, but he was not a historian. That was the outing for him. He said he's a politician, not a historian. But the fact that he admitted that the Holocaust occurred was a tremendous step forward, I think.
I just want to let everybody know that there's some more pizza up there, so feel free to grab some more at this time. And then we are going to open it up to questions from the audience now. So if anybody has a question, please just raise your hand and we'll find you a mic.
Well, I just want to say thank you for coming. It's been good so far.
So far. Give
No
him
one
more
know-
pizza, he might forget that.
No one knows what the future holds, right? So you had mentioned that it's kind of the U.S.'s responsibility as a superpower to look over like the Strait of Hormuz and the Suez Canal. We were recently discussing in our Middle East politics class, which Justin and Melissa know about, that Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal in '56 in response to the funding of the Aswan Dam and things like that. I'm kind of curious, so the Suez Canal is in Egyptian territory between the Sinai Peninsula and the Egyptian mainland. Kind of like the Mississippi River, for example, splits the United States. You can maybe make that argument, although Itasca is not necessarily a major shipping destination. But I'm kind of wondering why is it the U.S., why do you think it's the U.S.'s responsibility to look over the Suez Canal, especially in light that it is in Egyptian territory?
The Suez Canal is an international waterway. There are agreements about navigation and commercial passage through the Suez Canal. Just to correct the record a bit, the Suez Canal has always been Egyptian. Nasser did not really nationalize the Suez Canal. He nationalized the Suez Canal administration. And he offered, because the administration had a 99-year lease, and Nasser offered to pay the rest of the lease from 56 to 69, because the lease was going to last 99 years until 68. The Suez Canal opened in 69, and with a 99-year lease till, therefore, 1968. So had Nasser not done anything at all, the lease would have expired in 68. But what Nasser did, was forced to do, he had asked the World Bank for a major loan to build the Aswan Dam. The Aswan Dam up in Aswan, in order to control the flooding of the Nile. And the World Bank approved that. But then, after Nasser joined the non-aligned movement and worked with China and Indonesia and Ghana, and they had the first conference in 1955 in Bandung, Indonesia. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles got teed off, and through his influence, the loan was canceled. And he called in the Egyptian ambassador in March '56 to his office, and he read him the Riot Act, and he told him the loan was canceled. So Nasser then nationalized the Suez Canal in order to get the income from the Suez Canal, and the Suez Canal remains the second or first major source of income, foreign currency income for Egypt. That's hence he nationalized the Suez Canal administration, and he offered to pay the remaining years for the remaining years. The British and the French did not like that at all, and the French did not like him because he was supporting nationalists in North Africa. The British did not like him because he was supporting nationalists in the Persian Gulf. And then the Israelis, of course, came into the process, and they did the tripartite invasion in November of 1956. And in the United States, John Foster Dulles, under the pressure from direction of President Eisenhower, gave the famous heavy heart speech, November 1, 1956, at the United Nations, condemning the tripartite invasion, and forced the British and the French to withdraw, and forced the Israelis to withdraw from Sinai. And so the point is that despite all of that, the Suez Canal, like the Strait of Hormuz, like other international waterways, regardless of where they belong, they are governed by international law and free passage of commerce. And the reason is that safe passage of international commerce contribute to international stability. Even though we might not be anymore dependent on Persian Gulf oil, China and India and Europe are. So therefore, it is, if the Strait of Hormuz, for example, is blocked, the United States and the United Nations, not just the United States, the United States shares that responsibility, supposedly, with the 5 other major permanent members of the Security Council, or 4 others, right? Russia, China, and the United States, and France, and the UK. And so, in a sense, the 5 other members, all the 5 members are responsible. But invariably, if one of the 5 vetoes a resolution, as we have seen regarding Syria with Russia and China, nothing happens there. And as I said earlier, the United States as a superpower has interest throughout, and so therefore safe international navigation is its responsibility, as indeed the piracy of the coast of Somalia. And other countries are responsible, but perhaps other countries don't have the means and the power to do it, and the military presence and the military reach, the naval reach to do it. Britain used to do that in the 19th century. The United States does that now. It was one of 2 superpowers, but at the time, the Soviet Union, of course, was also in agreement with the United States against the invasion. So the resolution that passed the Security Council was not vetoed by any state.
I have a question related to the election itself. You said that the elections were fair. Do you think it was difficult or easy to rig the elections, having in mind that the president itself doesn't have any true power, but Ayatollah Khomeini is basically the person who is running the show? And I think that you're taking them too naively that they would allow somebody to run if he didn't have any chances. I think that the president of Iran is just the mouth of somebody who wants to buy some time to create the nuclear program, and of course, as soon as they get it, they'll use it. Because the thing is, if you use it, the other side will not, because there is no point of returning the nuclear attack. Even if the Russia, like for example in Cold War, used the nuclear weapon, what would be the purpose of the United States responding? Because everything else would be just pointless. So I think that they're buying time, and this is just another way for them to make what they originally thought. And we think about Iranians like very naive people, but I think that they are smart. They have a very long history, as you mentioned. So what do you think? Is it easy or very difficult to rig the elections? And is it really that they are not planning to build the nuclear weapons?
Well, I think you probably raised 3, 4 questions within your question, but the two basic questions that I thought you raised: one, the nature of the elections that occurred, and secondly, the power relationship and power dynamics between the supreme leader and the president. Unlike the elections of 2009, this most recent election was viewed by even international observers, including the International Crisis Group, that the election was viewed as fair. So there was really no question about the election. The fact is, there was opposition within the assembly in Iran to Rouhani running in the election. And the supreme leader allowed that to happen because, by all estimates, as in fact newspaper reports since then, right after the elections, thought that the supreme leader did not think, and his advisors did not think, that Rouhani would win. In fact, the 4 other major conservative candidates split the vote. I mean, he won because they split the vote. And he won without, as I said, unlike Ahmadinejad, he did not need to go through a runoff. So that's the election. Now, the question about the power dynamics and power relationship is a difficult question. I mean, the fact is, as I said earlier, it's a question for analysts, for scholars, for intelligence analysts, for you students doing research. Is an important question to dig into the power relationship. Very interesting, and I recommend here an article in the current issue of Foreign Affairs. I know it's in your library, and about the mind of Khamenei. It's a very sophisticated article and very interesting article about Khamenei. And, you know, there are, of course, two views, right? One is the optimistic view, and one is the cynical, pessimistic view. The optimistic view is that even Khamenei, he's a sick man, he probably knows he is not there forever, and he probably realizes that the Iranian public have suffered a lot because of the sanctions, that Iran cannot reach a national, regional, and international position of prestige if it remains a pariah state. So he probably allowing Rouhani to pursue this avenue. He is not necessarily sure whether the United States or Israel would necessarily even respond to these overtures. I'm not sure whether we would or not. It seems the president was willing to do that. And so he's allowing him much longer leeway to pursue these interests. This is not to say, now there are areas in the Iranian constitution which give the president certain powers. Within the Iranian constitution, the supreme leader does not control every aspect of decision making in Iran. Even under their own constitution, there are areas that the president can work on. And we don't know in the end whether Iran, I am of the view, and there are some who are of the same view, that Iran might be willing to compromise on the nuclear question if its right as a nuclear capable power is recognized. In other words, it's enough for Iran to be recognized as a nuclear capable power. The Israelis don't like that. Many here in this country don't like that. The reason they don't like that is because, and there is a truth to that, there is justification, is that I am not sure of the warning time that we would have if Iran decides to make a decision to move from capability to weaponizing. What is it, 6 months, 9 months, a year? We really don't know. And so that's a question. So this is one way of answering your question. probably I did not answer the other points you raised, but I think that might be enough now. Thank you.
Hi. There we go. You mentioned at I think the first thing you said was about the balance that the U.S. needs to strike between upholding its values and then obviously upholding its interests. We hear about this all the time, the balance. And I'm in the Middle Eastern politics class too, so we've been discussing this a lot. But it seems like the narrative that the more you learn, it seems like the more clear it becomes that for the U.S., values are nice, and it's great if we can support governments that do share our values, but ultimately our interests are essential. So values are nice, interests are essential. If it comes down to it, we'll choose interests every single time. Do you have days where you just think, man, like this is terrible. The Middle East would be way better off if we just kept our hands out of it, or do you genuinely think that although we are pursuing our interests, that our interests have served the Middle East ultimately for its good?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I am an optimist by nature. Probably I acquired that at St. John's, and I'm really sorry to hear you at a young age so cynical about values. I hope you really see the light one of these days. Now, you are absolutely right, that we have pursued our national interest. And you know what? We suffered from what I would call autocracy addiction. We have bought into the argument that dictators have offered us lock, stock, and barrel. Namely, that dictators are guardians of stability, that dictators can do our bidding for us, that their peoples are not qualified for democracy, the so-called Arab exceptionalism as dictators presented it, that their people are not ready for democracy, and that don't worry about our own people, we manage, right? And we bought that. And the reason we bought that, because of your first point, that it was easier for us to deal with dictators. Democracies, as our own democracy indicates, democracies are messy. And they are unpredictable. And they can be frustrating. I remember in 1979, during the Camp David, in 1978-79, during the Camp David talks, at Camp David, some of my students used to attend the conference, daily conference, press conference at 1:30 at Camp David by Jody Powell, at the time was the press secretary of the president. And some of my students who were like you in international politics and so on, so they said they wanted to attend the press conference, but they were not press. I said, well, the Marines don't see, so put your badge, student ID on a chain and put it here, show it to the Marines, so they wouldn't attend the conference. And so they would write about it. But you know what? Every time President Carter had an idea, he would talk to Mr. Sadat, and President Sadat would say, done, don't worry about it. I like it, consider it done. And the president liked that, right? He would go to Mr. Begin, and Mr. Begin would say, but Mr. President, I have a Knesset, I have a parliament, I cannot decide. I mean, Carter used to be so frustrated, right? But he realized that's a democracy. In 2003, when the United States invaded Iraq, we wanted to have our flights go over Turkey. And the Prime Minister said, I can't, I have to go to Parliament. And the Turkish Parliament voted against it. And Washington was so upset. I said, that's democracy. So we don't like democracies, right? We like it, perhaps barely like it at home. We don't like it overseas. Why? Because dictators provided our bidding for us. And their security chiefs provided our bidding for us about terrorism, about And you know, some of those were thugs, but they were our thugs, right? So they did our work for us until the Arab Spring occurred. And when the Arab Spring occurred, the president was faced with a choice. Here, for the first time in the history of the modern Middle East, since the nation-state system developed in the Middle East, you have millions of people, young people mostly, in the streets, demanding the removal of their dictators, people who were leaderless, non-ideological, were not marching against foreign powers, were not marching against colonialism, against imperialism, against Israel. They were marching against their own dictators. And when they began to force those dictators out of office, whether in Tunisia first, that Le Flic, the tyrant of Tunisia, had been in power since '78. He was forced out. Mubarak, I always say, you know, he was the third longest ruling dictator in the 5,000 year history of Egypt. Ramses II was the first, Muhammad Ali in the 19th century was the second, and Mubarak was the third. And he was forced out in 18 days. The president then said, my God, these people are asking for democracy. They are asking for reform. Then he supported Mubarak's removal. Saudi Arabia has never forgiven us for that, till this very day. So that was the case when, so the president then, when he was pushed about Mubarak, he said the new, I call it the Obama doctrine. He said that we would support a leader as long as his people support him. If his people no longer support him, we should not hesitate of throwing him under the bus. So, in a sense, that's what happened to Mubarak. Now, the question is, we also realized that you cannot transition to democracy from a period of decades-long periods of dictatorship. That the transition to democracy is messy, that the transition to democracy is fractious, that the transition to democracy is violent, that the transition to democracy in the short term might hurt our interests. So we began to pull back. And then you have this vicious dictator in Damascus. Then in Egypt, I will talk about Egypt in your class tomorrow, an Islamic party came to power. The president had already predisposed, in one of my last briefings before I left government, that if we want to engage the Islamic world, the best way is to engage Muslim majorities. That if 1% or 0.5% of Muslims are terrorists, well, you can't ignore the other 99%. We are talking about not 200 Muslims like, you know, in some village in southeastern Utah of some radical Mormons. We're talking about 1.6 billion Muslims. So you can't ignore 1.6 billion Muslims. So we've got to engage. So the president was already predisposed to that. His speech in Cairo, at least in rhetoric, was a fantastic step to that end. In other words, he moved away from this broad brush of terrorism with which we painted the whole Islamic world after 9/11 to a more segregated view of Muslims. And that's what happened. And so with the Islamic parties, then the president said, any Islamic party that is willing to play by the rules, that is willing to participate in elections, that is willing not to have one man, one vote, one time, but to pass through that and accept election results, multiple elections, then we would recognize it. That's why we recognize the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. But then there were other things that came into play and the situation changed. So that balance is not a question of just rhetoric, that this balance between national interest and values. But I mean, I think it is a perennial question. And I think we should perennially work towards that and on that. Because, I mean, in a sense, when the president the other day talked about the United States as being an exceptional country, he wasn't talking about how many drones we have. He was talking about the values that made this country what it is. And that's what made this country exceptional. But he also had to realize that it took us almost 100 years and a civil war and thousands of deaths to make it somewhat of a more perfect union. And it took us until the 1960s with constitutional amendments, Supreme Court decisions, and legislation to establish the meaning of the 14th Amendment. And you know, from 1776 or 1791, when Article 1 and all the amendments were adopted, until the 1960s. So basically, it's a plea for patience rather than really an immediate answer to your question. It's a long, perennial, enduring questions that, and I hope you will always ask it, rather than take the cynical view, well, our national interests prevail, and to hell with our values. You can't really abandon that and continue to say this is an exceptional country.
Well, we'd like to thank everybody for coming out today. Unfortunately, that's all the questions we have time for, but Mr. Nakhleh might stick around for a little bit afterwards and answer any other questions that you might have.
That's all right.
So please take that opportunity.